Lord, we again thank you for being our God, for loving us and for providing for us and taking care of us. And we ask that you'd be with us now as we look in your word. Help us to see and understand. Encourage us, Lord. This is a time that we need that. And we ask this in your Son's name. Amen. We have been working our way through the book of Ruth, and we're now in chapter 4. And if you have a study Bible, it probably says Ruth's Reward. And we think about that. We have family and friends that we talk to all the time, and we give them encouragement. You should trust in the Lord. You should follow in the Lord. And two questions usually come up. And the most important one is, well, what's in it for me? I mean, you say I should follow the Lord, but why is that? And what's in it for me? And that sounds kind of selfish, but there's a truth in that. When we trust in God and put ourselves in his hands, he does bless. There are rewards that come. And we're about to start into the part where Ruth is going to receive her reward. This is actually a two-part message. We'll only get partway through it today. Next week we'll finish it. But we're going to start in chapter 4, verse 1, where we read, "Now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there. And behold, the close relative of whom Boaz spoke was passing by. So he said, 'Turn aside, friend, sit down here.' And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, 'Sit down here.' And so they sat down." There's a lot going on in these first couple verses. And Larry said, "What in the world is minion in there for?" The 10 men, as it says that I just read, actually isn't in the Hebrew. The Hebrew word is minyan. And it's an assembly of at least 10 men that was needed for even synagogue. If you were going to have a synagogue on any given, any place in Israel, it required 10 men in order this to take place, and they had to be at least 13 years old. That was the age of adulthood for a Jewish male. And so if you had some kids, as long as they were 13 and up, you could have a minyan. That's not the same as minyan when we talk about Satan, for instance, and his little underlings that are out doing dastardly deeds everywhere. It sounds exactly the same, but it's not the same word. And when we look at this, there's a couple more things in this. There was a close relative in verse 1 that passed by. We've talked about this before. Boaz has been proposed to by Ruth. And he wants to marry her and redeem Naomi's land. But there's someone else that has first dibs, that has the first right of redemption. And that's the close relative we're talking about here. He is a Goel. And when he says, "Turn aside, friend," that word friend, again in the Hebrew, it's very misleading in the English. That word friend is one concealed. In other words, the name of this Goel that has first rights of redemption is never, ever going to be revealed to us. His name is going to be forever covered and concealed. We will never know who he was. And we'll get to why that is in a minute, but it's kind of an interesting little tidbit that we find in here. And also, when Boaz calls the meeting, he calls the other Goel to come and to meet with them, and called the elders of the city together. There's not one hesitation. Everybody does immediately what he says. And you wonder, why is that? And we mentioned before that Boaz was called Kael. There's a Hebrew word, and we looked at this verse, but I'm going to reread it again. This is in Exodus chapter 18. This is one of the places where we see the word Kael in the Hebrew, and it gives us a really good idea of what this word means. In Exodus chapter 18, verse 21, it says, "Furthermore, you shall select out of all the people able men." Able is Kael, "who fear God." So this is what a Kael man looks like. He fears God. He's a man of truth. They hate dishonest gain. And we're reading here, these are the the instructions to Moses because he couldn't take care of all the disputes with the people. And so God tells him, okay, you need help. And you're going to place these men, these Kyle men, as leaders over thousands or hundreds or 50s of tens, and let them judge the people. In other words, Boaz, who's an old man, that's one of the reasons we saw him say, bless you, girl, for choosing me when you could have had a younger man instead of me, an old guy. He was probably the leader of this group of elders that do the deciding and the judging of matters in their city. He's probably the number one guy. And when he speaks, they all listen because there's no one else that's called Kyle like this. He's called Kyle in chapter 2 when it says he's a man of wealth. He is the epitome of what we would want for leadership in our communities. They love God. They love truth. They're righteous. They're upright. They have wisdom. They know how to judge matters. So when he speaks, everybody listens, and they sit right down. And where do they sit down? In the gate of the city? And this is also interesting. We would think of this as, well, we're going to go to court, or we're going to go to city hall to decide a matter. But in Israel at this time, the city gate was the place where any matter was to be decided. And there were some good reasons for that. One of them is public. In fact, a minyan was required by law to meet during daylight hours. And it was so that if there was anyone that had testimony that had to do with the matter, they would be free to come and give it. And also, if there was some kind of argument, fighting broke out, of course, at the city gate, there's always guards there, and they would be there to help mediate whatever trouble might happen. But this kind of shows you, if you think about it, when Jesus was tried before the Sanhedrin, how illegal his trial must have been. There's a lot of reasons it should have never taken place, but one of them is that it was supposed to have been done during daylight hours. When they took Jesus aside for trial, it was at night. And it was supposed to be done in public so that anyone could give testimony. And the meeting against Jesus was done in secret so that anyone that might testify on his behalf couldn't be allowed in. It's a picture of what we don't want to ever be like. And here we see Boaz is leading the way and doing things that we should see done. And we have to realize Boaz, he wants the deal. He wants Ruth, and he wants to redeem Naomi's land, but he's going to be absolutely upright in what he does. Now, that doesn't mean he can't be shrewd and use a little strategy here, but he's going to do the right thing no matter what. And so to page 2, we will start in verse 3 now. Verse 3 and 4. Then he said to the close relative, Naomi, who has come back from the land of Moab, has to sell a piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. So I thought to inform you, saying, buy it before those who are sitting here and before the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am after you. And the man, the nearer Goel, said, I will redeem it. So Boaz puts this out there, and he doesn't give the whole package. He says, there's this piece of property. And if you're a businessman, you think, well, yeah, if I had more land, I could plant more, I could harvest more, I can make more money. This could be a good deal. And on the surface, you'd say, this is just what I want to do. But you have to realize Boaz is being kind of tactical here. When he called this man aside, first of all, at the city gate, you have to think Boaz has been in the city gate before. He knows when guys go back and forth to work, and he knows this guy's going out to his fields, and he's done this to catch him off guard. If we have time to think about things, we usually come up with a more reasonable answer. But if we're caught off guard, we might decide anything. And Boaz is using this surprise to his advantage. And sure enough, the man says, yeah, I'm gonna redeem this land because it would be a good deal for me. And then Boaz says in verse 5, on the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth, the Moabitess, the widow of the deceased, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance. Now, this nearer Goel, this unnamed person, this concealed named person, he knew Naomi would have been part of the deal. And he also knows she's an older woman. She's probably present right here at these proceedings, which is also another interesting point, just a little sidelight. Ordinarily, you would bring your own case before the court. So Naomi actually would be the one who would be asking for the Goel to redeem her property. But Boaz is not taking any chances, and he intercedes on her behalf, just as Christ interceded on our behalf. If we had on our own taken our case before God, we would have been in dire straits because we have nothing to offer. But the Goel is the one who has the ability to pay the redemption price, and he's interceding for Naomi. And as he intercedes for her, it's kind of confusing. It says that Naomi has to sell a piece of land. In the Hebrew, I read it in Hebrew, it's even more confusing. So this is pretty much what happened. When Naomi and Elimelech left Bethlehem and they went to Moab, they no doubt mortgaged their property. Now remember, we said before, the property stays in the family forever. It's the inheritance that God gave them, and it's his way of preventing poverty long term, because eventually you get your property back and you can start over again. But in the case of Naomi and Elimelech, they mortgaged their property, they went to Moab, it gave them some money to travel on and get started on. When she comes back, she still actually owns that property. It's her family property, but she can't use it because she's sold the right of its use to someone else. It's really more like a lease on the land. But she can't use that land. It can't come back into her possession unless someone buys that redemption back. Someone has to pay whatever is remaining on that contract, and we'll look at that contract in a minute, has to pay whatever the balance is to take that back. So Boaz is offering to do that, to pay the price to buy it back. And the first dibs Goel, when he sees that Ruth is part of the deal, he knew there's going to be an old woman, but she could help manage the property. She could work there. He doesn't have to raise up children in her name because she's past childbearing, so that's not that bad a deal. But Ruth is another matter. He probably has a family of his own. He already has a wife. He has children. He has the eldest son. The inheritance probably already figured out. And Ruth would complicate things quite a bit. Not only that, with Ruth's part of the deal, he has to support Ruth and Naomi as well as purchase the land. And someday, when that Jubilee comes again, all that land is going to revert to that family. Ruth and her son, in the name of Elimelech, is going to inherit that land. And so this first Goel, he's going to be out his money, he's going to be out his time, he's going to be out, it's too much. He says, it's not worth it, I can't do this. And if you remember Goel, there's 4 parts to being a Goel. That's the one who has the right of redemption, and he must be the nearest kinsman. You have to be closely related. You have to be able. In other words, if you don't have any money, you can't pay the redemption price. So you wouldn't be able to do it. You have to be able. You have to be willing. You have to want to do it. And here we see him saying, well, I don't really think I want to do this after all. And you must fulfill all the responsibilities of the Goel. You cannot just take the land and skip the deal with Ruth. You have to do the whole thing. That's what it means to be the Goel. And interestingly, and this goes back to the name of this first Goel, which was the one concealed. I read one of the commentaries and he said something very, very interesting. He said, isn't it fitting the way God applies justice? Because we don't always see justice. He said that the man who refused to raise up the name of his relative's family is going to be the very one that's going to have his name removed from history. Isn't that something? No one will ever know who this man was. He's a nobody. He could have been somebody important, but not wanting to do what he should have done caused him to be and also ran in history. We'll never know anything about him. So he says in verse 6, I cannot redeem it for myself because it would jeopardize my own inheritance. I have too much to risk to do this. He's looking out for himself and not his relative's family. So he says, redeem it for yourself. You may have my right of redemption, for I cannot redeem it. So Boaz has carefully mapped his strategy. You know, a lawyer, lawyers are supposed to tell the truth, but they tell it selectively. You know, they order things in a court proceeding so that when the truth is presented, it will sway people to a certain position. And Boaz has done exactly what he intended. As the Redeemer, he has moved things the way he wants them to be, and also the way Ruth and Naomi want them to be. Believe me, this is a package deal, and he's going to be the one now who's able to redeem her. And how this is done, the sandal and the rest of this story, that's for next week. We're going to take a little bit of a side road now because this is a very interesting detail. We're going to go back and talk about the contract itself. Because this is the thing, if you were a Jew, remember, patterns, we said before, that you find are prophetic. The things that we see now are going to explain things that we're going to see in the future. And we're going to look at the contract and what that means, and we're going to look at a future contract. And I think it'll be very interesting for us. What was the title deed for that land? Now, it's not actually mentioned in this passage, but we're going to look at one in a second because the Jews were very careful to record all the legal deeds. And they were kept and they were saved. Naomi and Elimelech, that's been 10 years. And yet when they come back, everyone knows exactly where her property is. They know the boundaries, the borders. They know how much it was paid for and how much it's going to take to redeem it. Why would they know that? Because it's in the contract that's a legal contract that's recorded. So we're going to look now at Jeremiah chapter 32, and we're going to see a really good example of what that contract would have looked like. In Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 6. We're going to look at a contract, and this is a contract that takes place in Israel when the northern and the southern kingdom are divided. And some of this, and this is in the southern kingdom in Judah. Some of the kings in Judah were good kings, some of them were not. And Zedekiah, the king here at this time, he has led the people away from the Lord. And because of that, the prophet Jeremiah has come repeatedly to him with messages from God warning him and telling him that destruction is coming. And so what did the king do? Well, they put the prophet in jail. If you go as a Christian and you witness to your friends, your relatives who do not know the Lord, they're probably going to attack you. And we have to realize that it's the easy thing to attack the messenger. The message, though, is true. And we don't want to take it personally. The king should have listened to the message that the prophet was bringing instead of just putting the prophet in jail and punishing him for the bad news, because the battle is really with the Lord. And the bad news is bad news. They're surrounded right now with the armies of Nebuchadnezzar from Babylon, and they're about to be destroyed. This southern kingdom is about to go into captivity. And so this is where we are in verse 6. And Jeremiah said, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Behold, Hanamel, the son of Shallum, your uncle, is coming to you, saying, Buy for yourself my field, which is at Anathoth, for you have the right of redemption to buy it. The right of redemption. So here is the job of the Goel, the one who is the Redeemer. He says, you are the Goel. Then Hanamel, my uncle's son, came to me in the court of the guard according to the word of the Lord and said to me, Buy my field, please, that is at Anathoth, which is in the land of Benjamin. For you have the right of possession, and the redemption is yours. Buy it for yourself. And this is a little afterthought. I love this verse. Then I knew that this was the Lord. The Lord tells us what he's going to do. And then when he does it, what do we usually say? I don't believe it. But what we should say is, well, then I knew that was the Lord. And this is an odd thing. The army has surrounded where they are right now. And Jeremiah the prophet is in chains in the king's palace. Not in the regular dungeon. He's closer by. But he's captive and he's not free to come and go. And yet his relative comes to him and says, would you buy this, the right of this property? Now, you have to know that the army has already captured this land. All the surrounding territories now in the control of Nebuchadnezzar. And you think, why in the world would you buy land that you're not ever going to be able to use and you're never going to see again? Why would you even sell it? Well, he wanted to sell it because obviously when you're under siege, you need food and water and medicine and all those other things take money. And when there's a shortage, guess what happens? The price goes up. So he's raising some cash to get by on in the meantime. And Jeremiah is being instructed by the Lord, yes, I want you to buy this land. We'll see why in just a minute. So in verse 9, I bought the field, which was at Anathoth from Hanamel, my uncle's son, and I weighed out the silver for him, 17 shekels of silver. I signed and sealed the deed. Now this is the part that we're really want to pay attention to here. I signed and sealed the deed, which is literally the sefer, which is the writing, and it's most often a folded or a scroll. He said, I signed and sealed the deed and called in witnesses and weighed out the silver on the scales. Then I took the deeds of purchase. There's two of them now, both the sealed copy containing the terms and conditions and the open copy, which I gave the deed of purchase to Baruch, which Baruch means blessed, by the way. This is his right-hand man. When you're in prison and you can't really do much and you still want to preach at the synagogue and whatever, you have someone that's kind of deputized for you that does things for you because he can go back and forth where you can't. And Baruch, blessed, if you say Baruch Hashem, that's blessed be the name, but that's a word we should know. This is obviously a great guy. And he gives the deeds to Baruch, the son of Neriah, the son of Mahasiah, in the sight of Hanamel, my uncle's son, and in the sight of the witnesses who signed the deed of purchase before all the Jews who were sitting in the court of the guard. And again now, they're not at the city gates to hold court. They brought court to where he's imprisoned. But again, this is an open proceeding. Everybody's witnessing it. The witnesses actually sign on the deed, and we'll see what that is in a minute. And I commanded Baruch in their presence, saying, Thus said the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, take these deeds, this sealed deed of purchase and this open deed, and put them in an earthenware jar, that they may last a long time. Think about the Dead Sea Scrolls. After thousands of years, those scrolls in those earthenware urns were still preserved. For thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, houses and fields and vineyards will again be bought in this land. So the Lord says, Jeremiah, I want you to buy this land. I want the deed carefully recorded and preserved, because one day we're going to be back here. Is Jeremiah ever going to be back there? No. Actually, when the conquest takes place and the Jews are taken into captivity, Jeremiah is left behind. He's an old man. He's kind of useless. They take the young and the strong. And he winds up being carried off to Egypt, and he dies there. He never sees this take place. But the right of redemption he has bought, and this land will be in his family's possession when they come back. And you think, well, wait a minute. They went into captivity for 70 years, so it's going to be more than 70 years when they get back. There'll be a jubilee in the meantime, so it's going to be back to the original owners anyway. There are no jubilees proclaimed when they're in captivity. So he's buying the rights to this land for the future when his family comes back, and it's recorded carefully and saved so that it'll be there when they get back. Now this deed, which is in two parts this time, there's one that's like the rolled scroll that has the terms and the conditions. In other words, what the property is, the boundaries, the borders, and how much it was paid for it. All that is in the deed, and it's sealed. And you say, well, why is it sealed? Well, just this last week, I was talking to some friends who they bought a house here on this island, and part of their house is on the neighbor's property. The previous owner didn't disclose that. So what are they going to do now? Well, they're going to have to figure out how to negotiate either buying a little more property so their house is actually on their property, or they're going to have to cut part of the house off. If you could go back and you could fudge the deed, if it wasn't sealed and you go back and you could change some of the writing in there, you could fix it. And the deeds are sealed so that no one has the right to change what has been taken place. Because 50 years later or more, or 100 years later, whenever the family comes back, they're not going to remember what happened. So it's carefully recorded. And we have to know that Naomi's property and all the terms are also carefully recorded, and they always stored them in earthenware jars like that. As a matter of fact, if you go in Brooklyn, there's a museum in New York, and there's also a museum in Jerusalem of antiquities. They both have an exact copy of this, which is the scroll, which in this case have strings wrapped around it, and they have an embossed seal